Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Mutual Connections. I'm here with my co-host Akifa. How are you, Akifa, today?
Good. Excited to be here. Excited to talk about AI.
And we have one of the pioneers of the AI field, I would say, and one of the people who start discussing responsible AI and fairness of AI early on, before all this generative AI and the hype we hear every day about comes to mainstream. Hi, Arash. Welcome to our show.
Hi, Shayan. Hi, Akifa. Pleasure to be here. Just a quick correction. I'm not a pioneer in AI. Maybe you can call me a pioneer in responsible AI. Barely, but definitely not a pioneer in the AI field as a whole.
There are different interpretations of it. We get into that. Arash, you started working in data, I would say, almost 2 decades ago. You have 10 years at Data after you graduated from school, and another 10 years at Accenture. And we know these companies, their main mission, if I'm correct, is how to adopt these technologies by different organizations. And I could see, as someone who has worked with data all his life, almost professionally, and publishing multiple patents from forecasting to different aspects of working with data, eventually you published a paper on fairness on AI almost 4 years ago, right? If I'm not mistaken. What was the problem you were actually attacking or trying to solve?
Good question. So you touched on my background. Let me explain that. So we used to do what we call the operations research. That is a lot of optimization, obviously using with data, not large amount of data. Selecting a sample size was a key factor of what we did. Then it became what was called big data. Then they called that analytics. Then they called that data science. Then they called that AI. So pretty much I have been doing the same thing, but my title changed. Now I'm considered an AI practitioner. It was a coincidence that I came across with the field of responsible AI. As you may know, in Accenture, everything we do is project-based. It just happened that there was one project on the topic of responsible AI. I joined the project and I told my manager that I've never stayed on any project more than a few months. She said that we are starting a new practice. We are starting from scratch. And I told her that I'd be happy to help you with building everything, but most likely I will not stay. It's now 6 years and I'm still on this field and I found it fascinating. And what is different in responsible AI compared to any other AI or data science or analytics work that I did in the past is that we were just solving problems narrowly in the past, like optimizing supply chain or helping companies make more money and things like that. Here, there is value to the society that is also considered. So on the technical side, it's actually a lot more in depth than previous data science or AI work that we did, because it's not sufficient to just directionally be correct or be better than the status quo, because we are making decisions about people's lives a lot of times when AI is used in high impact application domains. So all the nuances about AI, about the quality of the data, completeness of the data, like representations of different groups in the data, choice of the algorithms, all the technical aspects of AI are a lot more important. And also there are a lot of non-technical aspects that become important. You mentioned fairness, for example, which is concept, it's subjective. So how you blend all these things together, how you work with all different people with different backgrounds, with different considerations and expectations, and develop a common ground and methodologies, not at high level, which is like visions and policies, but also translating them into mathematical definitions and formulas, and then converting them into code and techniques and analysis. I found it fascinating. And it's a lot more satisfying and fulfilling than just purely running some code and building statistical models.
You opened up almost 10 different area of conversation for
That was the
today.
purpose.
Yes. And I hope you booked more than 2 hours about that. But let me start with one of them, and I'm sure Akifa already
I
sees
have a
a
lot of
list.
questions. Yeah.
Yes. So, but maybe the core concept we can touch base a bit to start this conversation is you mentioned fairness is a subjective concept, right? We know about even justice. We all have a sense of it, but fairness, justice, we hear conversation, equality is different from equity. We have seen that cartoon that if a few people want to reach to apple on a tree, if you give all of them the same chair to step on it, is not fair because someone is taller. So this have been a lot of conversation on it, how we even interpret this, not mentioning measuring it, not mentioning adopting it. But let's just start with fairness, as you mentioned. First, how do you see fairness as an element in the AI? Is it the same as ethical AI? Is it different? How do you define fairness, which I think you want to also give a measurable definition of it, which is not, very subjective. Let's start with that. What is fairness in AI?
I think you started with the most challenging question in the field of responsible AI. So let me attempt to distinguish between ethics of AI, AI fairness, and AI bias. Ethics of AI is not just about whether or not you are fair or unbiased. There are other considerations. For example, there may be use cases that, even though they are unbiased and they are perfect, very accurate, you don't want to do that. One use case that we came across in HR domain, there was a vendor built a game that participants interact with the game for half an hour, and the tool claims to detect a lot of their cognitive traits, memory, aggressiveness, resiliency, and then match them to the cognitive traits that are required for a job. I heard that the tool can also possibly predict the likelihood of developing some mental illnesses like attention deficit and so on. So the question is, do you want to have a tool to detect these things about the candidates who are applying for a job? That is an ethical question, and it's a lot broader and fundamental than whether or not the output is biased or not, or fair or not. That is ethics. If you want to build a home, regardless of how you build it, whether or not you should build it, the topic of ethics starts with that. Then there is distinction between fairness and bias. Bias existed for as long as we had data. There is data in the bias, there are bias in everything. So bias basically is a pattern in the errors that you have. The bias becomes fairness when it's about people, right? You can have bias in product forecasting. That is not fairness, right? So there are examples that you have bias, but they are not fairness. And there are examples that topic of fairness, but not bias. Some people, as you kind of touched on it, may argue that it's fair to build bias in AI. It is fair to have AI to favor certain groups because they were historically disadvantaged for whatever reason. Here's an interesting distinction between fairness and bias. And then we need to define what is it that we want to achieve. Most organizations say that our definition of a fair AI tool is a tool that is unbiased. Some organizations say, no, we need to put thumb on the scale a little bit to help certain groups, and that is fair. That is where we have distinction between fairness and bias. Basically, from the fairness perspective, you can have a neutral approach toward fairness. You can have a positive approach toward fairness. The positive approach has a lot of challenges, not only from ethical perspective, that whether or not you should help certain groups, because helping certain groups also means not favoring other groups, right? It's a zero-sum game. The ethical aspect aside, there are a lot of operational challenges with that, because then you are building or you're hard coding a form of bias in a tool. And when you're gone, no one may know that, right? So 5 years, 10 years from now, and then the people who are using and interpreting the results may not be aware of that the scores or the results generated for Shayan means one thing, and the scores and results generated for Akifa means something else. So there are many, many technical and operational challenges with hard coding positive approach toward fairness in AI. Our recommendation to governments and organizations generally is that let AI alone. Let's make sure that AI is unbiased, it's neutral, it's not causing bias. Now, you want to reverse some of the problems that you have in the society. Do that before AI or after AI. Let's make sure AI is as objective as possible in producing its results. If you are, for example, using AI for recruiting or hiring, you can try to increase the size of applicants from certain demographics, or help them to improve their resume, or help them educate them so that they can put together a proper resume. Or even if you need to favor certain groups, let's do that when humans are making decisions using the output of AI. But let AI itself be neutral and objective and unbiased. So this is basically the number one recommendation that we give. So we are not necessarily disagree with the potential need for positive actions, but we often advise that the AI should not be biased to achieve certain fairness targets.
When we talk about fairness of AI, usually people, mostly skeptical, start looking into all the areas that use of AI might go wrong. But I guess we can also mention some areas that without AI we use fairness. Maybe a good example of it is any company announce a new position, maybe few hundred people, if not more, apply for it. In the case of Google, I heard they receive about 500,000 resumes a day or something like that. But let's take a smaller case. We publish a position, 200 people apply within few days. And what happens regularly, HR looks into the first 50, maybe they pick 10, they call 3, and then they put them at the front of hiring manager, while the best candidate maybe was number 192. So with AI, if we can do a proper ranking of this resume and identify most qualified candidate, we have a more fair process of giving the chance to qualified people. My question for you is, by taking this example, and because of your vast experience working across different industries, where do you see these pros and cons of AI, the most effective area that AI can actually help with fairness? And where do you see the most risk, if you have such scoring or categorization in your mind?
Love that question, because you touched on the benefits of AI. We often keep talking about the risks and what could go wrong. But I'm a believer that AI can and has been solving a lot of the problems, including the problem of fairness. If you allow me, I can explain a success story that in one of the largest organizations in the world that is receiving millions of applications every year, we used AI initially very, very carefully to improve the efficiency. And soon we found that, yes, it is actually helping with the efficiency. Obviously not.
Those applications were job applications? What
Job
kind of applications? Job applications.
Candidates applying for jobs. So it helped improving the productivity. We showed that using AI helped improving the quality of decisions made. So we analyzed the decisions and we looked at the performance of the individuals hired a couple of years after the hiring decision. And we found that the candidates who were hired by AI are recommended by AI, they were more successful at the job than those who were not and were hired by people. So basically, the gist of that is that AI was better than recruiters in predicting the success of candidates at job. That is very important. That is important. And by itself is improving fairness.
That's
So,
really reassuring.
and I want to emphasize on the fact that accuracy and fairness are related, because if you have an inaccurate process that is rejecting qualified candidates and it's accepting unqualified candidates, you are unfair to the qualified candidates who are being rejected. So the fairness is not just about men and women and whites and blacks. Fairness can be defined based on any subsets of the population. And having an inaccurate tool, it's also an unfair. Right there, I argue that we improved both accuracy and fairness, and that benefits both the organization and the society. We also used AI to narrow disparities. AI can help surface the candidates of certain demographics that were historically neglected by recruiters, and also help us show the path of least resistance to narrow the disparities. Because in reality, you do have disparities on the outcome by whatever groups that you have, men, women, depending on the nature of the job or demographics. And you want to narrow that. AI can help you that what are the minimal changes that you can make. For example, what are the requirements in your job description that is excluding the majority of African Americans, right? Maybe one tweak in the job description can increase the size of African Americans who were historically disadvantaged in the recruitment process in the process. So AI can help you understand that. So number one, productivity. Number two, accuracy and validity. Number three, bias and disparity. And lastly, AI improved the accountability, because now we know why we made those decisions, what factors contributed to those decisions, why you rejected certain people, accepted certain people. Despite the fact that AI is not perfectly explainable, it's still a lot easier to understand the logic of AI than understand the thinking in the brain of recruiters. We have more visibility into that, and then we maintain the evidence of that forever. If there are internal audits, external audits, we always know what we did, why we did it, what factors contributed to that, and all of these things are providing a lot of explainability. AI can have huge amount of benefits if it is used correctly and responsibly, and that is exactly what we're doing. In the role of responsible AI, our job is not just to find the right balance between risks and benefits, is to shift that balance in favor of the benefits. Because we have a lot of tools, we have a lot of techniques, we have a lot of methods to reduce the accuracy, to reduce bias, to improve explainability, and all of these things. So it's not just finding the balance, it's just shifting the balance to reduce the risks and enhance the benefits. And this has been an emerging field, but a lot of progress have been made, and it's possible to use AI the right way to benefit organizations and the society. But unfortunately, that's not always the case. And why is, maybe you know the reasons. Now there are AI libraries in Python, and there are a lot of public data. You can build a tool that matches a job description to a resume in a week, not days. And there are so many people doing that. So I'm not, so depending on what you're asking, if you're asking about the potential of AI, if you're asking about the actual cases that AI was used to deliver all these benefits, including fairness and bias, the answer is yes. If AI can harm is it common that AI is used irresponsibly, improperly, without proper testing and validation? That is also a yes. And we need to have responsible AI to promote proper adoption of AI, basically, in particular in high impact application domains like HR, financial services, healthcare, and so on.
Maybe another example of the benefit of it can exceed the risk is access to healthcare. We know, for instance, it's a field I have worked on when it comes to foot amputation due to diabetic foot ulcer. Just from the zip code, we can predict if someone will lose a leg or not. AI simply is the best next alternative to services that anyway is not available, and this can be useful in the lack of what we would wish or like to have, like access to a doctor.
You mentioned the healthcare setting. So there are so many different technologies coming out that are fantastic, but also there is this fine line of, okay, well, will this be a therapeutic, or will it a digital therapeutic, for example, or would it be a maybe just a clinical support, right? Even for diagnoses and things like that. And I think you were touching on whether because of the bias, right, and or the lack of understanding that, should we truly rely on it to be the final say for a diagnosis, a final say for a therapeutic, especially when all of this is digital. I think that FDA came out with an entire section of how they would define what a digital therapeutic is. And for example, someone that has let's say depression, there's actually games now that you can play the games, and it, instead of pharma taking a pill like an SSRI, you can get your therapy through this game essentially, right? And so exactly what you're saying, well, how would we use that, especially for diagnoses, the software as medical devices? If we're going to say this is the final say, how can we rely on it? Then for clinicians, do they rely on it, or are they also held responsible now if there was an error? If they're relying on, let's say ChatGPT or something else, to what extent will they be held accountable? And these are all different questions that, got my brain going.
To be clear, I have no expertise in use of AI in medical domain, but my understanding is that any individual using AI for any purpose is responsible and legally liable for their actions and decisions and recommendations, regardless of whether or not they use AI or how they use AI or what kind of AI they use. Most of my work has been in business to business environment, and this is generally correct for businesses as well, that if one organization is using AI developed by another organization to make decisions about people, the organization that making this decision is responsible and liable. There are exceptions, and there is still debate going on, and we were part of some of the feedback that we provided to different government agencies. But when it comes to individuals, I'm pretty sure, especially in the sensitive and regulated field like healthcare, the practitioners are responsible. And as a general recommendation that we give to organizations and practitioners is the idea of human agency. So AI is there to help, but people are responsible. No matter how good are the recommendations, should not be used to automatically make recommendations. So human is responsible. So obviously the cases of autonomous vehicles are probably an exception, and maybe that's why it has been so controversial and so challenging, because there the question of who's liable is an interesting topic. But if a person or an organization actively and intentionally using AI to support decision making, they are 100% responsible for that use.
In the legal world, the biggest things when you're in litigation is you have to authenticate different documentation in discovery. And I guess this is changing the topic a little bit, but there's fear that courts do not want to add in certain technologies because they believe that there could be fairness issues, biases. There could also be a lack of credibility with the softwares and these programs to authenticate documents. Typically now, a person will authenticate it. There's a chain of custody and make sure that everything is good. So what would you say to lawyers and to judges that are skeptical about adopting it? And, obviously there's a lot of value and efficiency to have these things. So what would you say to those people that are skeptical about it to be in the courtroom?
Okay, it's a good question. So my understanding is if you're using AI to authenticate documents that are going to be used in the courtroom and there are major consequences of whether or not you have an error, then there are different dimensions or aspects of that should be evaluated. One is errors, accuracy of the authentication. The other one is the bias. Bias is a form of error, is a pattern in the error. You can have a tool or AI tool that it is very accurate on average, but is not working well for subsets of the population, or in this case, certain types of documents. If you think about it, the error, when we measure error in AI, we're talking about average error. When we are talking about bias, we're looking at the distribution of that error for different cases or different types of documents or subsets of the population. So it is important to not only make sure that it has low error or high accuracy on average, but also look at the distribution of that or do bias testing. On top of that, you have to make sure you have enough explainability, that understanding when it works, how it works, in which situation it does not work. And that reminds me of a more important use of AI in courtrooms. There are some judges now that are using AI to decide who should be released on bail and who should not. Basically, they are using AI. I'm sure you have heard of it. They're using AI to predict the likelihood that someone is committing or recommitting a crime. And for this example that I said, or even the example of the authentication, the challenge is that it's very hard, even if you're not talking about the more subjective aspect of fairness, if you're only focusing on bias, it is still very challenging to establish bias metrics, because for these cases you have false positives and false negatives, right? And you can tune or tweak your algorithm to have equals false positives for different subsets of the population. For this case, what is important is like ethnicities and gender, for example. And in that case, you will have a wide disparity on the false negatives. If you focus on false negatives, you will have disparity on false positives. So it's almost impossible to satisfy both types of error in terms of the disparity or bias. So not only we have the challenge about the fairness and positive or negative, even when you look at the bias itself, it can be very challenging because you have different types of error and where you should focus on. Sometimes you know which error is more important, false positives or false negatives. If, for example, you have the case of a medical test, obviously, like you want to make sure you don't have false negatives, right? So, but sometimes you don't. Sometimes both of them are important. And sometimes And so in these cases, you have false positives, false negatives because you have actuals to measure that. In a lot of times, you don't even have the error. If you are hiring
Mm.
people, you don't know what are your false positive, false negatives because there is no correct, actual, or ground truth to measure against. If you are giving mortgage to people, you don't know what are your false positive or false negatives. So in many cases, you don't even have error rates. So you cannot even define your bias target based on equal errors for men and women or different ethnicities. So the topic is very challenging, even when it comes to the technical level, not only at the more conceptual level to achieve that. So going back to your question, that what you can say to people who are skeptical, I think we should recognize that there is room for skepticism. So even though I am an AI person and I have used AI all of my life and I help organizations adopt AI, I understand that there is always some residual risk and it makes sense to have concerns. What we can do is to have an understanding of what is that risk and then making informed decision that when we want to accept that risk and providing as much information as possible in terms of the accuracy rate, bias rate, explainability, so we can make an informed decision. And at the end of the day, it's not a black and white decision. Really, it depends on the level of risk of the use case and on the risk tolerance of the organization. When I said the level of risk, when we are using in the courtroom, by nature is a high risk use case. You can have very little tolerance for errors and bias. Some other, if you're recommending training to people, maybe that's less important. And the other one is different organizations have different risk tolerance. And unfortunately, in the absence of up-to-date regulations in North America, organizations are doing self-regulations and it's a business decision for them. It's just risk versus dollars. And they make the decision whether or not they want to accept that risk because there is no benchmark. There is no
Mm.
regulation to determine what is acceptable, what is not acceptable. So it's a matter of business decisions, as I said.
Thank you for all the information. It's awesome to know about this, and I'm happy that we're discussing it because there's a lot of different innovations coming out. There's a lot of CEOs and scientists making things. So, what would you tell someone that wants to start a business related, they have a product or service and they're going to use AI and they're completely unaware that there's something called responsible AI versus irresponsible AI? What would you say to them? What tools would you give them and resources on how to implement responsible AI at the beginning of their venture?
It's a good question. So let me explain a little bit about what should be done as part of responsible AI. Basically, the main goal of responsible AI is to make sure AI tools do what they're supposed to do and they don't cause unintended consequences. So they don't do other things that we don't want them to do. And then in order to do that, half of the work is about the AI system itself, and the other half is about how the outcome of AI is used. So anything that we mentioned about the data, about the choice of the model, algorithm, explainability, they're all about the AI system itself. And then there are a lot of considerations about, as we talked about, the human agency, whether or not AI is making an automated decision, and so on. And then maintaining the scope of application, because sometimes AI is designed and approved for one purpose and later on being used for other. In order to do this, we generally need a cross-functional team. That is a multidisciplinary area right now. Usually we work with subject matter experts. It can be HR or financial services or healthcare. We need legal always, and we need obviously AI practitioners. So we need to put together a team as like an operating model. And then there are layers of assets. There are like policies, there are methodologies, there are techniques, and there are tools. It's when you say what I recommend to a person who is going to start a business, it's challenging for most businesses to put together all these things. So as an employee of Accenture consulting services, I think it's best for organizations to work with third-party companies who can help with this. It is challenging right now because it's multidisciplinary, it's evolving, things are moving so fast. It's very hard for every single organization to address all these aspects. And then something that we didn't mention, even if you are considering the AI system itself, there are so many different aspects of that, or so many different dimensions. It's the validity and accuracy, it's the bias, it's the explainability and interpretability, it's the accountability, it's the data security and data privacy, it's the human agency. And then with Gen AI, then you have toxicity, harm. So it has become so complicated that it's a lot easier to get help rather than just trying to do that. And that is really how the economy is, the economic system is working, that there are different players are being expert in different things. It's very hard for everyone to become expert in everything.
And I guess even if you do it at some point, things are evolving so fast. Again, shortly, you need to revisit everything, probably.
And there are more and more players that they offer tools for different aspects of this. For example, for Gen AI, now there are tools that they offer red teaming. So there are other Gen AI solutions, like agentic solutions, that evaluate the output of your Gen AI system. And then they even have other AI agents that simulate attacks or build test cases, thousands of test cases to push your system and test the resilience of that in extreme cases. For example, if you have a chatbot, if I send profanity, I'm not expecting to receive back profanity so it's not just making sure that these systems work in normal conditions, but also making sure that they work reasonably good or refuse to respond in extreme or unexpected situations. So there are tools, there are methods, there are policies, there are so many different aspects.
Arash, imagine I am a business owner or manager. Is there a way to break down this a bit more to different components?
Yes. If again we want to talk about AI, I recap different dimensions. It's accuracy, validity, bias, explainability, data privacy and security, and human agency. These are different dimensions or different aspects of AI that should be evaluated. And if any of these aspects are not tested properly, then the question is what could go wrong? And then there are different implications or consequences and different reasons that why you as an owner of your organizations, you have to do these tests. Obviously, the first thing that comes to mind is regulatory consequences, right? There are regulations. Unfortunately, regulations in North America are out of date and incomplete. Many aspects of AI and the decisions that we make are not regulated, but we have legal requirements for bias and discrimination. For example, in the US, there are some regulations for data privacy, light, but pretty much that's the extent of that. We have had examples that lack of validity has led to legal fines. There was an infamous example that Air Canada chatbot produced an outcome which was inaccurate, and Air Canada was held liable for that. So there are few cases that inaccurate AI has led to legal outcome, but for the most part, regulations are focused on bias and discrimination. Then the second aspect, or the second potential consequence, is brand protection or reputational damage. Even for the areas that there is no regulation, companies are very worried that there is a publication or something and they are on a headline. And obviously, there's a backlash. The consumers don't want to use products and companies that they don't trust. So that is very important. And that covers all the aspects or all the dimensions that I said. Even if you are using AI automatically for a decision that you're not supposed to, it just takes one screenshot that goes viral and really hurts your reputation. The third consequence is the impact that you have on the society, on your community, and on your employees as an organization. And that is rooted in your core value. Basically, the first two, legal and reputational, is when someone understands what you've done. The third one is rooted in your core value because it's valid even if no one understands. Even if no one can understand, you still don't want to discriminate. You still should respect the data of your employees and your customers and so on. So that is maybe even more important than the other two because it's rooted on your values. And the last one that is often neglected is how AI impacts your own organization and your decisions. I mentioned, for example, that using AI in HR has improved the accuracy of the decisions, the quality of hiring. No one from legal cares about this. So from legal perspective, if you randomly hire people, you're perfectly fine. No one will complain that why you're randomly hiring people. But obviously it's a bad decision for your company. So improving the accuracy of your hiring decisions helps yourself. Another example, if your employees are leaking your trade secrets, again, it's not a legal problem. Maybe it's not even a reputational problem. It's harm to your own organization. So having proper AI and doing the tests and validations across all those dimensions that I mentioned will not only help the society, but also help your organization as well.
A comment and a question. I think everything you've said is amazing. I absolutely love it. I think that I hope that this podcast episode goes not only to professionals and people that are in the different industries, different executives, but I hope it also goes to the public as well. Because the public, first of all, they're the consumers, regardless of, what is put out there. And there is a lot of skepticism. So it's really reassuring to hear from someone that this is your bread and butter, this is what you're an expert in. And especially, for example, with HR, it's reassuring. There's all of these things that can be discrimination, right? And I think applicants, for example, there's certain laws that prohibit employers from discriminating against race, color, nationality, religion, all these things. So as a person, you can't cross-check that sometimes, right? It gets messy, and that's where attorneys get involved. But now you're saying that you have responsible AI that are making these decisions more effectively. They're making it efficiently. You don't have to worry about the inner intentions of a person as opposed to objective data. And so that's, really reassuring for businesses. And I hope that the public can, take that and not be a skeptic. Now, my question to go off of this is, what would you say to the public or to skeptics that say, this is all fine and dandy, but I'm going to lose my job in HR. I'm going to lose my job in this or that. So, what would you say? And that's just more of a broad question, because
I,
AI is obviously automating a lot of things.
I think it's a very good question. So, as all of us, as individuals, as citizens, every aspect of our life is being influenced by AI. If you think about our knowledge of the world, even if you're not looking at Instagram and social media, even if you want to read a book, the recommendations for most books are coming from either Amazon or whatever tools you're using. Our interest, habits, behaviors, our styles and shopping patterns, our career job opportunities, our credit worthiness, ability to get a mortgage, our healthcare and what health services or treatments we receive, how much we pay for products. All of these things are determined by AI. It's really, really important. So I fully understand why there is AI anxiety in the public. And all of that happens so fast, maybe in the past 5 or 10 years, that every aspect of our life is, I wouldn't say is determined, but at least but influenced. And then as individuals, we are interacting with AI. We are being influenced by that. We don't know how it works. We don't even know if it works properly. We cannot control it. We have no control on any of these algorithms. And often we cannot adapt. So the only thing is that we should trust that the builders of these AI systems are doing their job responsibly. That is the only thing that's left there. And the reality is that, at least for those of us in the United States, we cannot expect the government to do that job. Because as I said, for the most part, all of this is self-regulation right now. So it's only a trust and hope that the people and organizations who are building these AI and are influencing everything in our lives are doing their job responsibly. And I'm glad that I'm one of the people or part of the solution, but I fully understand that we still have a lot of ground to cover, because not everyone is up to the same standard when they are building and deploying AI. And it's just understandable that why people, and when I say people, there are people who are not familiar with AI, and then there are people who are familiar with AI, and they are equally nervous about whether or not the AI that is built for them is trustworthy or not.
Actually, that was a question I had in mind to ask. Dr. Jeffrey Hinton, he's known as godfather of AI, and he just won the Nobel Prize in Physics because of his work in this area. And I guess he quit Google because he wanted to freely talk about dangers of AI. And he mentioned maybe for the first time we have built some entities that will be smarter than us. I wanted to ask you, you have been working on AI and data-driven platforms for many years. It started with narrow weak AI, just unlike my phone, predict this price or that. What is your take on that? Do you think even though we try to make all these responsible AIs, do you see a future? It might be a bit of a scary question, but do you see a future that they might decide, on their own and not necessarily follow the prompts we are giving them and decide, what, I don't like this piece of this prompts. Maybe I make a bit of fun of Shayan next time he asks me a serious question. As simple as that. What is your take? Where do you see this industry is going, and what can be done about it?
I'm not naive enough to aim to predict the future, but I say that I'm worried. I'm worried for the first time. All along, I was telling people that we are okay. We got discovered. This is the first time that I'm truly concerned. If you consider Gen AI or GPT models or Chat GPT, we are all fascinated by how powerful they are. And the thing is, right now, they are trained on known knowledge of humanity. So everything that we provided these models as training data is everything that we already knew. So they don't know anything in addition to us, right? All their knowledge is our knowledge. But very soon, they will be interacting in problem solving in issues, and they're collecting data and analyzing data. And very soon, their knowledge will exceed the collective knowledge of humanity. And their ability to analyze, summarize, and produce recommendation also already exceeding our ability to do that. So very soon we are going to have AI tools that, again, I don't know that's going to happen or not, but that, to me, that seems the most likely scenario. We are going to have AI tools that by far, 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 far outsmart not every individual person, but all of humanity as a whole. And then all of these guidelines that we have become useless. The whole topic of human agency becomes meaningless. That how can a human be in charge of something that is by far smarter than that person? We say that, you mentioned, Akifa, the example that a doctor is using AI to do diagnosis. And right now you can say that you are responsible, you use that AI and as an information. But what if that AI is by far more informed than any single doctor? It becomes irrelevant to ask the doctors to monitor the output of that AI. Even if you ask them to do that, they know that it's not something that they can do. I don't know what's going to happen, but I think it's scary. And what's more scary, as a practitioner who has been in the topic, I know that nobody is in charge. No government agency is in charge. No tech company has figured this out. There is no comprehensive collaboration between companies who
Because
can.
of the competition, I guess they all have.
There are some collaborations. I, as part of Accenture, have been part of that, but they're not comprehensive. They're very, very patchy and very limited in scope and very shallow. Even now that we are still smarter than AI, we are not able to manage this problem. So in future, it's just getting harder and harder. And I don't know how that may become possible.
That's extremely powerful. Wow, that was really, really powerful. And we're putting a lot of trust in these things. And it's, one hand, as you were saying earlier, an amazing thing. It's great for a lot of different things. pushing innovation, and it's helping solve a lot of gaps. At the same time, when you have to think about it, and we're relying more on these technologies, we're not using our own, even, professionals will use ChatGPT and kind of at the beginning, etc., and rely on them. The more and more we rely on this, then, at one point, if they do have more data than the collective human data that's already inputted, what if they had biases at that point and that we don't know? And how would we even go about that? So I think it's extremely powerful what you said.
And interestingly enough, when you say, what if they have biases? First of all, they will have biases for sure. And then we have already entered the era of machines against machines. I mentioned the agentic red teaming before. The volume of content generated by generative AI is so large, and the nature of that is such that we cannot analyze that using statistical analysis. For traditional AI, when we talked about bias, for example, for recruiting, you can do statistical analysis and say, is the AI biased toward men or women or whites or blacks? When it's producing content, image or text, you cannot do that. So, and human has limited capacity. So we are building another AI to do that. So there is an AI that is producing content. There is another AI that's testing that content. That has already started. So we have already lost our grip on controlling these things. We are delegating our responsibilities to other AIs to check the AI. And it's just
Wow.
going to be a
Wow.
slippery slope from now. And then if you think about the topic of deep fakes, or how social media can influence our perception of the world or influencing how we are voting in elections, just wait for the time that AIs are designed for the purpose of producing content for these things. And then there are other AIs designed to fight it back. And then the question is, who has better AI? And then these AIs are autonomous. And then are they even going to listen to us or what they think about us? It's hard to imagine where it's going from here.
Actually, I was talking with someone at Facebook Integrity Department. It was back in 2017, and he said they have something around 1,000 hour of video ad uploaded to Facebook platform by publishers, and they can be anything, advertising drugs or targeting vulnerable populations for financing, and they were already looking into how to tackle this challenge. They cannot reject them all because that's their business model, but who can really sit there and monitor 1,000 video an hour uploaded to a platform like Facebook?
Exactly.
Yeah, I was in a conference, I believe last year, with Zach Cohen, who's the chair of the biomedical informatics, and the editor of what was it? The editor in chief of the New England Artificial Intelligence Journal for Harvard. And I asked him a similar question, and he said a very similar answer to you, which is we really don't know what we don't know. And now everything, with ChatGPT, it's exactly what you mentioned. It's the wide known knowledge, and there's a very, very amazing predictivity surrounding being able to output that based off of what we already know. But he said this a similar thing, that in the future, once it's exceeded that, now where will we stand and how will we go about it? So the fact that you're doing responsible AI now, and hopefully we could be optimistic that it will be built out and it will be in a way that it will hopefully even maybe have better ethical and morality than human beings, and even though it does exceed it. So let's hope that it's a positive thing.
Arash, I have another question for you, and it comes back. Akifa touched on it about people losing jobs to AI. I guess we all were surprised to see the first jobs being replaced by AI being creative jobs from writing and designing. What would you recommend to younger generations? Did they want to select a career? And I got this question from some even university professors. Should my kid still go and study computer science? When you listen to CEO of NVIDIA, he was saying, I guess, from now on, we just talk to computers to create applications for us. The programming language becomes human language. What do you recommend to people who are on early days of picking a field as their profession?
I don't have a kid. Don't want to deal with these type of questions. It's very hard to answer this. I still think studying data science is relevant. And interestingly enough, when I was very young, I was the first year of undergrad, I believe that I need to learn computer, but also I need to learn other fields because what matters is how you apply computer to solve problems in other fields, computer by itself. That's that was my understanding, like maybe 25 years ago. And I think that's still the case. We still need to know AI and data science. That is becoming a more and more important aspect of our lives. But that by itself may not be enough. So that should be part of our portfolio. No one knows where we're going. But I still believe that studying data science and maybe data science and law, data science and ethics, data science and healthcare, these combinations are basically it's just like risk management, right?
So this is kind of basic talking skill. Anything you want to do, AI or computer science per se is not a field that you can pick as a profession. You need to know enough about it to
It's
do
AI
whatever
literacy.
else. It's part of the basic literacy for any profession. That's your take. My takeaway from this conversation is what again I quote Jeffrey Hinton. He says, maybe the most interesting area that we can see good comes out of AI is healthcare. Because I guess what can go wrong if you try to create better health systems, health practices, and treatment for the people? It kind of reaffirms, me and Akifa, we both work in our on our health startups. It kind of affirms again, this is the biggest potential for good use of AI. I don't know if you agree with that. I know trade is important, a lot of things, but maybe AI exposes least risk. Maybe our algorithm are not the best. Maybe the treatment could be better, but at least by nature of it is not imposing a lot of risk that can totally go opposite direction, benefiting humanity.
I I wouldn't say it's least risk. My sense is that healthcare is high risk, high consequence domain, but I think it has the most opportunity to improve the lives of human, and also it's so complicated that there is a lot for AI to help. It's not like trade or many other aspects that you mentioned. In healthcare, there is a lot of benefits. So again, if you think about risks and benefits, I wouldn't say necessarily because the risks are low, but because the benefits are high. So I often
Interesting.
personally thought about how much AI can help with healthcare, even though I have no experience in healthcare myself. But that's often the example that comes to my mind in terms of the potential.
I have one more question for you, Arash. I'm sure many of our listeners will appreciate that. If you're going to hire a new person now, given the AI is new, not everyone had the opportunity to have a deep dive into it. What kind of candidate you look, or you would recommend to your clients to hire to do whatever their business are? How do you incorporate impact of AI in hiring decisions? So level of AI skill, how important is that for you when you hire people? How much, for instance, they know prompting or they understand these AI systems? Do you see this as a mandatory skill?
That depends on the role, what kind of job I have. Because, for example, even if you think about responsible AI as a field, we have people who are more expert in the advisory role in policy regulations. We have people who are more technical in terms of like building bias monitoring dashboards or agentic red teaming and things like that. So there's a whole, as I said, it's a multidisciplinary field. So it's very hard to say what are the skills that are in demand because there's a portfolio of roles that we need to fill even within responsible AI.
Okay, it's not a must-have yet for the roles.
Well, it's the must-have is becoming good understanding of how generative AI works. That is becoming part of everything. Even for what used to be traditionally predictive modeling or other forms of AI, Gen AI is becoming a hybrid, right? We more and more we don't see like traditional AI or Gen AI. They are becoming blended because, as you know, Gen AI, for example, is not very good with numbers and analysis. Understanding of Gen AI and, as you said, prompting and being able to, or at least knowing how to improve the quality of the responses, that is becoming almost a requirement for all jobs. Even if you want to have an advisory role, for example, I'm working with many legal colleagues. Now they all know how Gen AI works, for how long it retains your data, whether or not it's using data to train its back-end models, all of these things. Even lawyers need to understand these things if they want to play a role in this field. So, yeah, I
That's
think that
awesome.
is the emerging area that everybody should be familiar with.
It's interesting. We discussed what is fairness in AI, how we break it down to different dimensions of it. You mentioned fairness, ethics, security, privacy. We discussed how to think about it might go wrong. You discussed about regulatory framework, reputation, brand, values of organizations. Who is responsible for the AI? Can AI be smarter than us? How much we delegate to AI? And what else would you like to add?
I think we covered most of the topics. I just want to thank you both for providing this opportunity for me. That was a very interesting discussion.
Thank you. It went a bit back and forth on different aspects of it, I guess because of complexity of the issue. Kifa, do you have anything else, or we can wrap
I
this up?
loved it. I loved it. I loved the conversation. I learned a lot. I think whoever listens to this will learn a lot. And the one thing that particularly stood out that I didn't intuitively know was, of course, it makes sense in retrospect that biases can be good, depending on how you put them. So that was really interesting amongst all the other things that you talked about. So thank you for your time, and I'm just really grateful for all the knowledge that you gave.
We had Dr. Arash Bateni. He is part of leadership team of responsible AI at Accenture, and he helps organization to adopt and implement AI responsibly. Thank you for your time, Arash.
Thank you very much, both of you. Really appreciate the opportunity.